Dennis, it's a great privilege to speak to you. You saw that our main story today was focused on the escalating threat of nuclear conflict. I wonder, knowing what you do from about how Congress operates internally, about what contingency there is for nuclear war, how a layperson like myself could predict that escalating tension with Russia would lead to a standoff of this nature, and why we're being presented with this spectacle by an administration that seems to be framing itself in preparation for the November elections as a safe pair of hands.
Yeah, I mean, we can't look at nationhood as where it is right now, which is a precondition for war in a run-up to an election. America has to take a different direction here. We have to realize that Russia is responding to a long series of events, beginning with NATO's encirclement program, the 2014 overthrow of the Ukrainian government, the missiles that are now being sent, the drones that are being sent towards Russia, the $61 billion that was just appropriated by Congress, most of which is going to the military in the U.S. to create arms to have war with Russia. So look, this dialectic of conflict we're in, nuclear war isn't anything to mess with, obviously, but the fact that it's now in the discussion, whether it's from a TV person in Russia or not, has to wake people up that we're screwing around with World War III, and that we need to start pulling back and talking with each other instead of a war of words, which it could escalate into nuclear exchange.
How is it that the Biden administration are able to frame themselves as, and indeed not only the Biden administration, I actually would like to fold into this, if I may, Dennis, the media establishment? Say, for example, if you take MSNBC anchors or, Jen Psaki, when they speak about the current DOC in the Democratic Party, in contrast to the Republican Party and under the auspices of a figure like Trump, what we're being invited to accept is that it's the grown-ups versus petulant, psychopathic, demagogic, 20th century style tyrants. But I'm beginning to think that if you were neutral, it would be safer to vote for Donald Trump than to vote for Joe Biden. That administration is hell-bent on war. That if you're looking for a safe pair of hands, the often declared small hands of Trump would be safer than the mad, arthritic, potentially red button intent finger of Joe Biden. Do you think that's a reasonable argument? That they're not rational, they're not the grown-ups, they're kind of vampiric psychopaths?
Well, there's a couple different elements here based on what you just said. First of all, the media is typically a spear carrier for the government. It's only seldom that the media has taken on the government as it did during the Pentagon Papers era. What we have is a repetition of government propaganda that goes on. Now, with respect to the candidates that are in this race, I'm not taking the side of either candidate or any of the candidates. What I am saying is that we need to take a different approach as a nation. America needs to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. This idea that somehow the rest of the world died and left us in charge has to go out with the dodo bird, because we as a nation cannot afford this arms buildup. 56% of our discretionary spending went for the military, and it's more than $1 trillion, and add in the intelligence, so-called intelligence spending. I think that America right now has to pull back, change its direction. Otherwise, we're headed towards a much wider war, no matter who the president is. Remember, Trump was clueless about the deep state, and they were attacking him from every direction. And I don't know if, and him being in the dock right now, I guess, is an extension of that. But we just have to keep in mind that we're dealing not with individuals and their personalities. We're dealing with a whole extension and archipelago of government that is global.
Yes, that really does seem apparent. Are we naive to think that any occupant of a entrenchant set of systems could deliver meaningful change while operating within a paradigm that seems to be restrictive by its nature and designed to prevent the kind of changes that are necessary? A simple example would be this. If there were a referendum on the $95 billion aid package that's just been granted to the collective interests of Ukraine, Israel, and some imagined and projected threat against China regarding Taiwan, if there was a referendum on that, I don't imagine that $95 billion bill would be passed with the effortlessness through which it was,
Right.
its lubricated pathway through both the Senate and Congress. So what we have there is a disjunct between the establishment and the people that it governs that's it sort of is distinct and maybe irreconcilable. So why are we not discussing the possibility of referenda, decentralisation, the ability for ordinary people to... The arguments that are made, Dennis, around handguns by people that are anti-gun, they say when the Bill of Rights and the right to bear arms was passed, you didn't have semi-automatics, you had muskets. Well, at the same time that the Constitution was designed, it wasn't possible for everybody to have immediate democracy and immediate referenda and representation through fully immersive technology. So why are we pretending we need this sort of rather croaking, corruptible and deeply corrupted model of democracy or representative republicanism, or whatever people want to call it? Why are we pretending that there isn't a better way?
Well, first of all, you're right. Russell, if the American people had a direct vote on whether to spend $95 billion more for wars against other countries at a time when real wages are going down and rents are going up, the cost of housing is going up, cost of childcare, food, every essential of life is going up. Inflation is taking a big chunk out of people's expendable budget. When you look at that, people, of course, they wouldn't vote for a war. But what happens? The Congress is captive. And the Congress is supposed to vote the will of the people. That's what the whole idea of government of the people, but it doesn't happen that way. It's not working that way. And so that's why today people have to pay attention to what's happening in the congressional races, because if a member of Congress is voting against your interests and people have an obligation to start checking how their member's voting, then you're the one, the referendum then becomes in November, so you vote to replace that individual. So, this whole idea about a democracy or republic, whatever anyone wants to call it, is a government of the people, but it's not happening right now. It's a government of special interests. It's a government of the military-industrial complex, which really doesn't care if there's a war or not, as long as they keep on making it. But you can make more, as they're doing in Ukraine and in the Middle East, if you can keep the tensions going, and you can create this dialectic of conflict. So I'm running as an independent because I know that this dichotomous thinking, which characterizes U.S. policy, has to be broken, that there has to be a way to say, look, there's another way of looking at the world. And of course, the dichotomy doesn't even exist anymore in a sense because you have a unipolar government pretending that America is at the apex of a unipolar world.
Yes, and it does seem that that is the determining factor in many of the conflicts we're describing. And of course, you are running as an independent candidate for Ohio's 7th congressional district, and you've just mentioned the significance of that position. Realistically, though, when it comes to a bill like that has just been passed, although there are notable exceptions that have spoken out against it, and I think 21 people in Congress voted against that bill, they were all Republicans, and in the Senate, Massey and of course Rand Paul spoke out against the bill, as well as the 702 surveillance bill. I just wonder, Dennis, when it comes to something as complex as the arming of nations that are involved in conflicts that a significant number of people don't agree with, how you are able to represent those interests and rather than just rhetorically airing them, actually ensure that those interests are served, which is, of course, the dynamic that we're that we believe is in place, or at least that's explicitly what's supposed to be happening. No one believes that's what's happening.
Well, the mythic dimensions of government of the people is that people have a say in what's going on. But keep this in mind, since 9/11, America has spent about, we've increased the deficit to 34 trillion. 8 trillion of that is due specifically to the wars since 9/11. Now that equals about $97,000 per family of four in America. Would people willingly give that up? No. But our basic way of life has been undermined since then by the government's decisions to continue war. We went in war against Iraq that was based on lies. I led the effort against that war. We waged war against Libya. Should have never done that. It was a total disaster. We're spending money for war, and that leads to a destructive undermining of our quality of life here in this country. This whole idea about guns and butter at the same time, don't kid yourself. I mean, more and more of our budget is going towards war. And, this, you can go back to Sparta or Athens. We are militarizing our society, militarizing our thought, militarizing our consciousness to the point of where everywhere we go, we bring a hammer and everything we look at is a nail.
This is fascinating, Dennis, and that's why I want you to come and join us now to hear the answer to this question. When the Iraq War was being augmented, designed under the auspices of a lie, it was the hawkish Republicans that coalesced and drove us towards war and towards more surveillance and towards more censorship. And yet now the party of war is the Democratic Party. What changed, Dennis? Answer that question. Join us for the answer.
Yeah, I think what happens is this. The congressional party when the Democrats were in charge in the White House, the Democrats generally will be following the executive. The congressional Democrats will follow the executive. Same things happen when the Republicans are in charge. You have a Democratic president, the Republicans will resist. A Democratic president, the Democrats will go along. During 9/11, you had a Republican president, you had Democrats in Congress who went after that president. But my view, Russell, to get right into the nitty-gritty of that, a war which cost America anywhere between $3 and $5 trillion, depending on who you talk to, 1 million Iraqi lives, 5,000 American men and women who served the country killed, all based on lies. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Al-Qaeda's role in 9/11 did not have anything to do with the anthrax attack, did not have weapons of mass destruction, was not a threat to America, had neither the intention nor capability of attacking America. And so what do? We waged war, we killed all those people, and the people who told us those lies. Remember, I held an impeachment legislation towards President Bush and President Cheney for lying to the American people. But the people who lied, no consequences. The people who are lying to us now take us into wars around the world. No consequences. This is an example of what happens when government is out of the reach of the people, when government is not responsible, when the media simply parrots a government line. This is a dangerous moment in American history, and it really needs to take a different direction. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running as an independent. Imagine this, Russell, 217 Republicans, 217 Democrats, and one independent, me. And I'm ready to take up that challenge because I believe this country not only deserves better, but we need to change the narrative. That right now, the narrative muzzles free speech. It wants to dismantle TikTok, suppress campus protests, do away with Assange and all the whistleblowers, broadcast atrocity propaganda. We need to change the narrative, and that's one of the reasons why I intend to go back to Washington with the support of the people, of course, of the 7th District.
Dennis, isn't it exhausting to maintain a degree of enthusiasm and optimism, knowing, as surely you must, that it is the infiltration of finance into the political realm that entirely dominates and controls outcomes, that as long as you have a Congress that represents donor interests, as long as you have a Congress where there are lawmakers that invest in companies that benefit from war, or in the case of Nancy Pelosi, it appears that she has incredible insight when it comes to the fluctuations in the big tech market. As long as there is money in politics politics in the way that there currently is, isn't it impossible and naive at best to imagine that we could actually implement the kind of changes that I think all of us recognize is necessary?
Well, first of all, in my case, I've served in Congress for 16 years, the first time, and I won most of my elections while being outspent by the opposition without taking any money from corporations at all. Since the advent of Buckley versus Vallejo and Citizens United, Supreme Court cases which essentially let corporations control the American political system, the ability to raise money over the internet has never been more important. I mean, that's how I rely on getting into office. When I'm taking on these interest groups, I raise money over the internet. Kucinich.com is the website that people can go to. But what that does, that enables me to be free. Most members, when they get to Congress, they go to their respective party headquarters, they get a book about this thick, and that book then tells them all of the political action committees to call. And when they make that call, they're putting a hook into themselves, and sooner or later, the members are just filled with hooks and they can't represent their own district. So, this problem that you talk about is the most serious problem in our democracy. It enables interest groups to control the Congress. And, one of the things that I've been able to do with the help of a lot of people is to be a free agent. So I can't be bought and I can't be bossed. And that puts me in a position of being able to make a difference. And one final thought, Russ, I'd like you to think about this. I have a little cartoon I keep at my desk, and it's of a guy who is carrying a wheelbarrow full of hot coals as he saunters through one of the lower circles of hell. And you've got two of his bosses in a higher circle looking at him walking through hell, pushing his wheelbarrow full of hot coals. And one devil supervisor said to the other devil supervisor, well, they're looking at this fella, I don't think this guy gets it. Well, I get it, okay? I get what's happening in Washington. And I think that one person can make a difference. But you cannot do it if you come with compartmentalized thinking, us versus them, wherever they are, and a belief that war is inevitable. I believe that peace is inevitable. But we have to embrace and embody principles of peace in our consciousness. And part of the problem, America's gripped right now by a false consciousness, which says war is inevitable. And as a result, war becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you know what? We need to break that. And I intend to do that.
Dennis, do you think that the emergence of Trump and of Bobby Kennedy latterly is an indication that there is an appetite for anti-establishment candidates? And do you think that, in effect, Trump is an independent that has marshaled the Republican Party around him, albeit a libertarian, or however you want to categorize Trump? Oh, someone's posted that. Someone's posted that cartoon, the wheelbarrow cartoon you just talked about. Someone posted it. It's a deal, not deal, but it's that Far Side. It's a Far Side cartoon. I just saw it. Someone posted it on our Awakened Wonder chat, our locals community there. Cool. That was cool to see that. I like that. Do you not think that, in a sense, the American people are really tired of the uniparty, and in effect, that's what the Trump phenomena is about? Now, of course, you can, and I'm sure you will, quibble about Trump in office and whether or not Trump acted like an independent, whether that's in the pandemic or the way that he handled taxation. Or a lot of people now in the chat on Rumble will be saying, no wars under Trump, plenty of wars under Biden. I just wonder, Dennis, if really, until we start to look at either alliances that transgress the former categories or real empowerment of ordinary people, it's difficult to penetrate what Mike Benz and others have called the blob, the set of interests that are so embedded that they can't really be affected by the kind of contained discourse.
Right. Russell, whether you call it the blob, the deep state, the permanent government, there is such a thing in Washington. When I raised that issue years ago, when Trump took office, I was working at Fox News for a while, and I saw what was going on, where these interest groups inside the government were actually attacking not just Trump, they were attacking the presidency. That's a problem, because the president of the United States, no matter who the president is, needs to be able to exercise an executive function. And there was an attempt to restrain him from anonymous sources. Now, can an independent, can a person who is independent of thought be elected president? Yes. Now, Trump's election came as a result of democratic failures on trade agreements, which didn't have workers' rights, human rights, or environmental equality principles. The deindustrialization of the Midwest accelerated because of those trade policies. I voted against China trade because I understood that when we send our jobs over there, what we're going to import are the values as well of China. And we exported our own values and they weren't registering in other countries. We gave up some basic rights here. We've seen the United States economy get undermined. Our strategic industrial base evaporated in many areas of the country. So no matter who's elected president, they need to have an independence of thought. They cannot be a tool of a party. They cannot be someone who's going to be pushed around by interest groups. Now, whether it's Donald Trump, Robert Kennedy, or if Biden suddenly President Biden expresses a new quality of independence, that remains to be seen. But the American people, I think, are very concerned that our leadership is moving away from the things that really matter to Americans. Freedom, certainly, but economic freedom. You can't have political freedom if you don't have economic freedom.
Do you sometimes sense with the escalating surveillance and censorship that is being legitimized, legislated for and introduced globally, but particularly in your country, that there's a sense that something very powerful is fermenting, that the reason that that various pillars of the establishment are creaking and grinding and working so hard to impose banal bureaucratic forms of tyranny is because they sense that there is something quite profound and spiritual burgeoning and waiting to erupt.
Oh, I think absolutely that's happening. When you look at the effort of government, let's say in America, we'll talk about here, to in passing the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act amendments to enable government to spy on more and more Americans, reach even deeply into Americans' private lives where government doesn't belong, frankly, to vitiate our Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable search and seizure. Why does that happen? That comes from government being fearful of the people. And government uses fear as a weapon, too. They use fear as a weapon to build a military budget. They use fear as a weapon to control people. And when people start to resist that control, when they say, wait a minute, this isn't what freedom means anymore. You're changing what freedom means. Freedom means get government out of my life on the things that matter to me personally and privately. And so, when you have the FBI having all of these FISA searches, millions of searches of Americans where their unwarranted searches start to proliferate, this assault on sensibility, it's an assault on our Constitution, and it's something that I think Americans are sick of. And, basically, a government's going to be redefined here. And as American government gets redefined, so the world is going to be looking at that. There is an interchangeability here between America's status and the status of other countries as well. People look towards America, and the changes that are happening in America, what's happening on campus, for example, could provoke some revisiting of some of these very issues that we're talking about.
On campus, I suppose what you're talking about is the kind of pivot when it comes to the subject of free speech, because pro-Palestinian marches are being censored and reviled by interests that were formerly supportive of free speech in a broader context. That's something that we can discuss in a moment when we go over to locals with our Awakened Wonder community. We'll also be asking you, Dennis, with your permission, because on this channel we're all about conviviality and collegiate conversation. Fire Girl 2020's question that pertains to this: Dennis, she says, because I happen to know her, she's a member of our Awakened Wonder community and a cyber friend. Dennis was once cancelled for admitting to a UFO sighting. What does he think of recent UFO disclosures by the Pentagon? And why now does he think, what do you think about that? Now, we'll also be asking whether or not, Miss Molly's question, do you ever collaborate with Thomas Massey or Rand Paul on how we can stop funding these wars? We'll also be asking you Janice Six's question. Dennis, do you think they'll stop separate state laws in order to bring about another lack of freedoms? Maybe that's about abortion. All of this we will discuss with our Awakened Wonder community, as well as I'm very interested in your views on spirituality as a recent convert to the Christian faith and a recently baptized man. So, Dennis, will you stay with us for another 10 minutes or so of conversation, please, sir?
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so if you're watching us on Rumble now, we love you, we adore you, we admire you, we appreciate you. Remember, become an Awaken Wonder. We're posting a link right now in the chat. If you use the code ISurrender, you get a month free. You can cancel anytime if you don't enjoy the meditations, the book club, the additional content that we provide. If you don't like the idea that you are providing us with resources to march forward gloriously together, let's start getting into this stuff. I want to welcome some of our new members like Yo Dabba, Magic Man 314, Stephen GH, Kathian 62, and Shaktiful. They will be joining us for this conversation, I'm sure, like Ashella, she's in the chat, and Katie Beth. Get over there, introduce yourself to this fantastic community, and join me and Dennis for a little bit of a chat. Thanks for joining us today. Now, tomorrow we will be back, and we are covering so many subjects. We'll be talking about RFK and Trump, I'm sure. We will be talking about so much more. So join us then. Get in the stream early. Begin the conversation. Let us know what you want us to talk about. We will join you tomorrow, not for more of the same. We'd never insult you with that clap trap, but with more of the different. Until then, if you can, stay free.
Many switch in, switch on, switch off. 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 Many.
Hello, beloved community. Thank you so much for